Frances Alcott took the job as cook for a widower's 3 sons on the 14th of May, 1866. She hadn't planned on staying past Fort Bridger. She was crouched beside her wagon tongue in the dust of Independence that morning, working a loose pin with dirty hands, when the first complication walked into camp. Have you ever agreed to something that simple and watched it quietly become the thing you hadn't planned on at all? The Bradshaw train had left Independence that same morning. 42 wagons, 117 people. One trail boss named Harlan, who had made this crossing 4 times and had the worn-down look of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything. Frances had joined 2 weeks before departure, paid her trail fees, and introduced herself to no one unnecessarily. She was competent. She was organized. She had one problem only: she could not cook. She could manage a fire. She could boil water. But the cornbread she made on the first evening came out the color and approximate weight of river clay. She ate it alone beside her wagon, watching the fires of 41 other families burn companionably in the dark. It was the morning of the second day that things changed. She was crouched beside her wagon tongue, working a loose pin, hands already dirty, when a small voice said from approximately knee height, "What are you doing?" She looked up. A boy 6, maybe 7, brown eyes, serious expression. Something on his chin she hoped was molasses.
"Fixing my wagon."
He considered this with the gravity of a child who considered most things carefully. "Our pa says ladies don't fix wagons."
"Your pa and I will have to disagree."
He nodded, apparently satisfied. Then he turned and shouted across the camp with the full lung capacity available to a 6-year-old. "Eli, Sam Combe, look at the lady fixing her wagon." 2 more appeared within the minute. The eldest 8 years old, with the careful eyes of a child who has spent a year being the responsible one. The youngest arrived at a dead sprint, tripped over a tent rope, and sat down hard in the dust without crying. That appeared to be a practiced skill. They stood in a line and stared at her.
"Can I help you 3?"
The middle one, Sam, she would learn, pointed at her wagon pin. "That's going in wrong," he said. "The groove faces that way, or it slips on the rocks. Our pa does it like this." He was 6 years old and entirely correct. She let him show her. He did it with the concentrated authority of a very small expert. When it was done, all 3 examined the repair with the solemnity of engineers inspecting a bridge. "Good," said the eldest. His name was Eli. "Come eat with us," said Sam. "Ellie burnt the eggs again." "I didn't burn them." "They were black, Eli. That's called well done." The youngest had not yet said anything. He looked up at Frances, reached out, and took her hand with both of his, as if that settled the matter entirely. His name was Pete, and he was 4 years old, and that was simply what he did. That was when their father appeared. Tall, lean in the way that comes from years of outdoor work rather than shortage, with a face that had probably been easier once and was now mostly just tired. He was carrying a skillet and wearing the expression of a man for whom the egg conversation was not new. He stopped when he saw her.
"My boy's bothering you."
"Your youngest has decided we're friends. The middle one fixed my wagon pin. I'm still deciding about the eldest."
The eldest, Eli, looked at her with something approaching respect.
"They shouldn't approach strangers."
"They were helpful. The pin would have slipped on rocky terrain."
He looked at the wagon, then at his boys, then at her, the careful recalibration of a man who expected one thing and found another.
"You're traveling alone."
Observant.
That almost made him smile. He had a skillet in his hand and 3 sons watching, and too many miles ahead to smile easily, but it was close.
"Harlan told me this morning the train is short a cook. Our last one turned back at the Kansas border."
"I see."
"I'd reinforce your axle before we leave Independence, and there's a ford on the Green River that's rough. I've crossed it twice. I'd get you through."
"In exchange for cooking."
3 meals a day, until Fort Bridger."
She looked at the youngest, still holding her hand. She looked at the burnt skillet. She thought about the cornbread.
"Until Fort Bridger, and the axle reinforced before departure."
She paused.
I should tell you, I'm not a trained cook. Camp food I can manage. It won't be refined.
My boys ate burnt eggs this morning, anything above that clears the bar. Done.
They shook on it, once firm. The way two people shake hands when they both understand what a transaction is. Neither of them acknowledged Pete, still holding her hand between both of his, as though the arrangement had been his idea all along. She was 31 years old. She had refused 2 proposals of marriage, left a teaching post in St. Louis that paid her half what it should have, and spent 18 months convincing a land office clerk in Jefferson City that a woman could hold a grant in her own name. She was not a woman who accepted poor terms. This one, she decided, was fair. The first week on the trail established several things Frances had not included in the negotiation. Pete required only that food be warm and unambiguous. Sam had opinions about every meal and expressed them without reservation or apology. Eli ate whatever was set before him, which she found admirable or mildly alarming, depending on the day. Caleb ate last, standing, usually while doing something else. She noticed this on the 3rd evening and set a plate down on the wagon tailgate where he was checking harness buckles.
Sit.
I'm fine standing.
You're eating over a wheel. That is not fine.
He looked at the plate. He sat. He finished everything on it without comment. The next evening, he was already sitting when she brought it out. He didn't thank her for the correction. She didn't expect him to. In the 2nd week, they had their first real disagreement. It was about the noon stop. Caleb wanted to push through, cover 4 more miles before the creek crossing. Frances said the oxen needed the rest. He said they were fine. She said he was wrong. He stopped the wagon. He looked at her. She looked at him.
I've driven oxen on this trail for 2 seasons.
I've driven these particular oxen for 3 weeks. The near one has been favoring his left front since this morning. 4 miles on that, and you'll be fixing a shoe at the creek instead of crossing it.
Caleb got down from the wagon. He walked around to the near ox, crouched, checked the foot. He stood up. He called the noon stop. He didn't say she was right. He didn't have to. The stop said it. Sam said it loudly and with enthusiasm on her behalf, because Sam had inherited whatever gene produces people who cannot let a point pass unclaimed. Frances was right, he announced to the camp at large. Sam, said Caleb. She was though. Sam. Eli put a biscuit in Sam's mouth. Problem resolved. Frances caught Caleb looking at her that evening. Briefly from across the fire, he looked away. She went back to what she was doing. Neither of them said anything about it. If you're listening from somewhere along your own stretch of road, tell me where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying this story, leave a like or any quick interaction. It helps the platform understand that this kind of content matters. By the 3rd week, something resembling a routine had settled without either of them designing it. Frances rose early, had coffee on before Caleb finished the morning check on the animals. He brought water to her without being asked. She kept his portion warm when he came in late from night watch. They did not discuss any of this. It simply happened, as practical things do between organized people with too much work and too little daylight. What they did discuss often was everything else. Caleb had a detailed and extensively supported opinion about the territorial government's land grant process. Frances had 18 months of documented experience with it. This produced, on a slow afternoon walking beside the wagons, a conversation that lasted 4 miles. Land law, the competence of clerks as a professional class, and whether bureaucracy was a natural human condition or a failure of imagination. Sam walked between them for most of it. "What's bureaucracy?" he asked.
It's when the people whose job is to help you make it as difficult as possible to actually be helped.
Sam thought about this with genuine concentration. Like when Eli makes up the rules for a game, but all the rules happen to be ones he's already good at.
Precisely like that.
Eli, walking 6 feet ahead, didn't turn around. "I heard that," he said. 3 weeks in, Frances had stopped counting days to Fort Bridger in any active sense. The prairie had a way of collapsing time, grass and sky, and the steady rhythm of hooves and wheels, the same fire in different dust every evening. She had crossed small rivers and gotten her boots wet. She had watched Caleb handle a sick ox at midnight with a steadiness that impressed her in the quiet way genuinely competent things impress. She had listened to him tell Pete a bedtime story. Low voice, patient, a bear and a river in a register so different from his daytime one that she stopped what she was doing just to hear it. She had not said anything about any of this, particularly not to him. The Green River crossing happened on a Tuesday in late June. Harlan had scouted it 2 days before and declared it passable, high from spring runoff, but manageable. Wagons in pairs, downstream angle, move fast enough to hold purchase on the riverbed. Caleb went in the first pair. Francis watched from the bank. He read the current without arguing with it, held the angle through the deeper channel, and made the far bank clean. He turned and waved the next pair in. Francis's wagon was second. The first 50 feet were fine. She felt the riverbed through the wagon's resistance, solid enough, moving fast, manageable. She held the angle. It was working. Then the upstream ox stumbled. Not badly, not a fall, but enough the angle shifted. The wagon swung sideways into the current, and the river immediately made its opinion known. The drag was hard and immediate. On the far bank, Caleb was already moving, back into the water, upstream of her wagon, fighting the current at a diagonal that only made sense if you understood what he was trying to reach. He was trying to reach her. He didn't, because Francis had already stopped waiting to be reached. The method she'd been shown no longer applied. She did what made sense in the moment, drove the lead ox hard left and downstream, using the current's force rather than opposing it, letting the river swing the wagon back into alignment through momentum. It worked. Loud, wet, nothing elegant about it, but it worked. She came out 15 feet downstream of the intended landing, water pouring off the wagon sides, oxen blowing. Across. Caleb reached her 30 seconds later, soaked to the chest. He stood beside her wagon and looked at her.
Where did you learn that?
I didn't. I worked it out.
Whiles you were in the river.
There wasn't time to work it out before.
He checked the oxen, the wagon, the angle she'd landed at. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who is genuinely recalculating something. He didn't say anything else, but something shifted in how he looked at her after the Green River, not the revision of that first morning, which had been about correcting an assumption. This was something quieter, something neither of them named. They didn't speak about the crossing directly that evening. Caleb built the fire more slowly than he needed to. When Pete climbed into Francis's lap with a stick he wanted carved into the shape of a horse, Caleb watched them for a long time before he looked at the fire instead. Fort Bridger was 3 weeks out. Francis knew this because she had been counting, and because counting mattered, and because she had told herself every morning since the Green River that it was important to know how many days remained before the agreement ended. She was counting because she needed to be counting. The evenings had become a problem. Nothing happened in them that shouldn't, nothing close. But there was a particular quality to the hour after the boys slept, camp sounds settling, fire burning low, Caleb on one side and her on the other, where talking or not talking felt equally natural, and that was its own kind of problem. He told her about his wife one of those evenings, not the grief of it, not directly, but the before, Ohio, how she had wanted to go west from the beginning, and he was the one who needed convincing, and then she died before they left. The particular cruelty of that. Francis didn't say she was sorry. It felt like the wrong size.
She sounds like someone I would have liked.
He looked at the fire.
She'd have had opinions about you.
Good ones or bad ones.
Both. That was kind of her specialty.
The closest to a real smile she'd seen from him. Not the almost of that first morning, but an actual one, small and briefly present, like something that had forgotten it was supposed to stay hidden. Francis looked at the dark past the fire. That was easier to look at. Sam got sick 10 days before Fort Bridger. A stomach ailment was moving through half the wagons on the train. In most families it passed in a day. Sam ran a fever for 3. He decided, with the clear-eyed certainty of a 6-year-old in distress, that he wanted Frances. He expressed this by refusing everyone else, including his father, with considerable conviction. She was up before Caleb knew she'd gone. She brought the fever down through the night. Cool water, a damp cloth, talking when he wanted to talk and quiet when he didn't. By dawn, he was sleeping with his head against her arm. Caleb found her there in the gray light. He stood in the wagon opening for a moment. He didn't say anything. He went back to the animals. She understood that too. A week before Fort Bridger, a storm came through in the night. Not a dangerous one, no lightning, no flooding, but the kind of hard-driving rain that comes sideways off the plain and makes tents useless. Frances's canvas had a weakness on the left side she hadn't found until the water came through it. She was still trying to fix it at midnight, in the dark, when Caleb appeared with a lantern.
Get your things.
I can manage.
The boys are asleep on the right side. There's room.
She looked at her leaking canvas. She looked at the rain. She got her things. She spent the rest of the night in the far corner of the shaw wagon, her back against the sideboard, listening to rain on the canvas and the even breathing of 3 sleeping boys. Caleb was across from her, near the opening, keeping watch the way he kept watch, without apparent effort, without complaint. At some point around 3 in the morning, Pete rolled over in his sleep and ended up against her side. She put her arm around him. It was not a decision. Caleb, from across the dark wagon.
He does that.
I noticed.
A pause.
Thank you for staying with Sam when he was sick.
He wanted company.
He wanted you specifically. There's a difference.
She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did he, apparently. They didn't say anything else. The rain came down and the boys slept, and that was all. But she lay awake for a long time after, listening to him breathe in the dark, and she was honest enough with herself to know exactly why. Fort Bridger was a collection of low buildings and dust, and the noise of a place where trails converge. Harlan called a 2-day rest. Wagons that needed repair got repaired. People who needed to resupply did. Frances's wagon was in excellent condition. Caleb had seen to that across 10 weeks of trail. The agreement ended here. She spent the first day going quietly about her own business, checking provisions, reviewing her maps, talking to the fort's trader about the road ahead. She was organized, she was prepared. She had a land grant and a destination and a plan that had always been clear. She did not say anything to Caleb about leaving. They both knew the terms. On the morning of the second day, he helped her check her oxen, their usual routine, nothing particular about it. He found a loose shoe on the rear animal and fixed it without being asked. She packed the last of her cooking things into her wagon. When she finished, he was standing a few feet away, watching the fort's activity, not watching her.
Road splits 2 miles out, left forks easier, right's faster.
I'll take the right.
He nodded. That was all. The boys had said goodbye the evening before. Sam told her the next cook wouldn't be as good. Eli said she was welcome back if the land grant didn't work out. Pete held onto her sleeve for a while, then let go. She climbed onto her wagon and drove out of Fort Bridger. She didn't look back. That took some effort. The first day alone was fine. She was a capable woman on a well-maintained wagon on a good road, heading for precisely what she'd set out for since Jefferson City. The sky was wide, the grass ran flat to every horizon, the oxen were steady. There was nothing wrong with any of it. The second day was less fine. Not because anything went wrong. The weather held. The road was clear. Everything was as she had planned it, which was the problem, because she kept noticing what was missing from it. No argument about the eggs at breakfast. No one to appear at dawn with a lantern and 3 words. No low voice in the dark telling a story about a bear in a river. No Pete, who weighed almost nothing and always found her arm in his sleep. She made camp that second evening and built a fire and sat beside it and looked at it for a long time. Frances Alcott had always known her own mind. She was not a woman who confused herself. She had been clear about what she wanted for 31 years, and she was clear about it now, which was the inconvenient part. She knew what she'd left behind at Fort Bridger. She had left it correctly, because it had not been offered, and she was not the kind of woman who waited around hoping. She sat with that for a while. Then she put out the fire, hitched her oxen, and turned the wagon around. It was a 2-day drive back. She made it in a day and a half. She came into the Bradshaw camp in the afternoon. The train had moved on from Fort Bridger, slower than her, no 2-day rest behind them. She found them camped at a creek crossing. She saw Sam first. He spotted her from 50 yards and ran at full speed. He arrived at the side of her moving wagon, grabbed hold of it, and informed her at considerable volume that the new cook put too much salt in the beans, that Pete hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and also where had she been. She pulled the wagon to a stop. Ely appeared next, walked up with studied calm, looked at her, looked at the wagon. "I told you the land grant might not work out," he said.
I haven't been to the land grant.
He considered this. "Good," he said, and went back to what he'd been doing. Pete arrived last at a walk, which was unusual for him. He climbed up beside her on the wagon seat and put his head against her arm and said nothing at all, which was the most Pete thing he had ever done. Caleb was at the creek, checking the depth for tomorrow's crossing, boots already wet. He looked up when he heard the wagon. He went very still. Frances pulled the wagon alongside the bank and looked down at him. He looked up at her. The creek moved between them.
The right fork was faster. I'll give you that.
He waited.
I turned around because I wanted to. Not because the land grant failed and not because I needed the escort. The road ahead was perfectly manageable.
She looked at the creek, then back at him.
I turned around because the camp was quiet and I kept noticing what wasn't in it, and I decided I was done pretending I didn't notice.
Caleb stood in the creek with the water moving over his boots and looked at her for a long time. Then he said,
I didn't ask you to stay.
I know.
I should have.
Not a long speech. Not even close, but he had never been a man who needed many words when the right few would do. He held up his hand. She took it and stepped down from the wagon to the bank beside him. The creek kept moving. Somewhere behind the trees, the camp sounds continued, fires being built. The evening routine, Sam's voice raised about something, as it reliably was. They stood there on the bank while the light came down low and gold over the water. Nothing was resolved in the neat way. There were still months of trail ahead, a land grant in the Willamette Valley, 3 boys, and about 100 practical questions that 2 organized people would have to answer in plain terms. They would. That was the kind of people they were. But the agreement they'd made in independence, clear terms, fixed end date, nothing complicated, had quietly become something else, somewhere between the Green River and Fort Bridger. And they both knew it, and now they'd said so. Which is how most of the real arrangements in a life begin. Not with fanfare, not with certainty. With 2 people on a riverbank deciding to stop pretending they don't know what they know. They made it to the Willamette Valley in September, 3 months and 4 days out of independence. Frances's land grant was exactly what the deed said: good soil, water nearby, timber on the north side. Caleb said it was a fine piece of land. He said it simply, the way he said most things that mattered, which by then she had learned to read correctly. Sam said his bedroom better have a window. Ely said nothing and started measuring the timber. Pete took her hand, the way he had that first morning in the dust of independence, and held it while they stood there looking at what they'd come to. Some agreements, it turns out, are not the ones you signed. They're the ones that form in the quiet, without ceremony, while you're busy doing something else entirely. Have you ever left something or someone without saying the thing you should have said, and spent a long time wondering if it would have made a difference? Leave it in the comments. Sometimes it helps to put it into words.